Love is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers from the shadows, trembles behind silence, and reaches out with a trembling hand just to pull back again. But when a soul built for running begins to stay, child, you better pay attention. There comes a moment so quiet it nearly goes unnoticed. A moment where the energy changes not with sound, but with silence. It is in this stillness that the avoidant begins to speak in their own language, a language without words, one made of breath and presence, of half glances and lingering goodbyes that almost sound like stay. The silent shift is the most profound kind of communication because it carries the weight of what has not yet been spoken, the tenderness that dares not name itself too soon. The world teaches us to listen for declarations and bold gestures, for grand confessions and public romance. But those who've been hurt, those who've built homes out of retreat and safety, they do not come forward with drums and parades. They enter love like a whisper enters a prayer, tentative, trembling, but sacred. The avoidant does not announce their arrival into love. They let the atmosphere speak for them. They let the air between two people fill with questions they are not yet brave enough to answer, but their presence begins to shift. They stop running, even if they do not yet walk toward you. They pause in your presence, even if their heart is still rehearsing an exit. That pause is where the truth lives. Imagine a man who once left every message on read, who used silence as a shield and distance as a defense. Every time connection began to bloom, he'd disappear into the thickets of distraction or pull away with a polite but shallow excuse. But lately, he doesn't vanish so quickly. Lately, he lingers after your jokes and looks at you like he's listening to something older than words. He still doesn't say much, but his body remains in the room. He doesn't flee when you talk about your dreams. He listens, not always with his mouth, but with his presence. And presence, for the avoidant, is a confession more profound than any "I love you" they can muster. When someone who once made an art out of detachment begins to show up, not in dramatic declarations, but in consistent stillness, you are witnessing the invisible shift from fear to affection. The same man who once checked out of emotions is now alert when you're hurting. He doesn't know how to ask what's wrong, but his eyes do. He offers you his silence not as neglect, but as reverence. And in that quiet, a new language is born between you. This is how the avoidant begins to love. Not with volume, but with vibration. Not with promises, but with pauses. Their stillness becomes a sanctuary where their soul peeks out from behind the fortress of old pain. You begin to notice the shift, not because they are suddenly romantic, but because they are suddenly there. Present in conversations, not rushing to end the call, not avoiding the hard topics. They may not dive into intimacy head first, but they stop running from its shadow. And that stillness, that unspoken commitment to staying in the moment, is a louder declaration of love than they have ever made with their voice. They are still afraid, yes, but fear has stopped being the pilot. Fear is now a passenger on a journey their heart is slowly beginning to take. Think of the friend who once joked their way out of every deep moment. Every time you neared the soft parts of them, they'd armor up with sarcasm or push you back with logic. But now, when you speak of loneliness or loss, they stay. They don't interrupt. They don't fix. They just remain. That is the silent shift. That is the soul saying, I'm not sure how to walk into love, but I'm trying not to run from it anymore. And there is something profoundly poetic about that. The avoidant does not fall in love the way others do. They unfold into it, layer by careful layer. And when you begin to feel their presence more deeply than ever before, when their silence feels filled with emotion rather than empty of it, you are standing at the threshold of that unfolding. You are being invited into the stillness where their heart is learning to sing again, not with words, but with the grace of simply staying in the room. The quietness becomes an offering. The stillness becomes sacred. And while others may overlook it, you, tender-hearted and watchful, will recognize it for what it is. The sound of someone who once ran, now choosing quietly to remain. There is a sweetness, a subtlety, a softness in the way those who fear love begin to show it. And it will not come wrapped in ribbon or wrapped in roses, nor will it be shouted from the rooftops or sung from balconies. No, child. When the avoidant begins to love you, they do not arrive like fireworks in the sky. They arrive like morning dew, quiet, consistent, and entirely unnoticed unless you are still enough to see the shine. They show up in small ways, not because their love is small, but because their courage is still learning how to stand. And those small gestures, though easy to overlook, are the tremblings of a heart that once hid behind walls, now peeking through the cracks. They might remember how you like your coffee, not because it's a habit, but because they've paid attention to the ritual of your comfort. They might text you just to check if you made it home, not knowing how to say they worried. They might offer you their jacket when it's cold, not realizing they've given you something far deeper than fabric. These are the avoidance love songs, sung without melody, offered without pretense. The man who never wanted to be vulnerable starts to share articles he thinks you'll like. He sends a song that reminds him of you, not to make you swoon, but because he's trying to reach across the silence in the only way he knows how. You see, some people declare their affection with grand gestures. Others, they carry it in their pockets, tucked between moments, dropped like breadcrumbs in your path, hoping you'll follow, hoping you'll see. Because the avoidant has been taught that love means danger, love means exposure, love means surrendering the very armor that once saved them. So they begin small, they test the waters with teaspoons, they dip one toe into the current just to see if they'll drown. And when you welcome the gesture with gentleness instead of demand, they return again with something slightly more. That is the language of the healing. That is the rhythm of the cautious heart, beating in soft rebellion against the fear that once held it captive. Imagine a woman who has built her life on independence, who has worn her solitude like silk, proud and impenetrable. She doesn't ask for help. She doesn't cry in front of others. She does not lean, because leaning means trusting, and trusting has a cost. But one day, she brings you lunch. She tells you she saw it and thought of you. She doesn't stay long, but she stayed long enough to show she remembered. Another day, she asks how your day went, and she waits for the answer. She's not scrolling, not distracted, not performing. She is there, listening, even if her hands are fidgeting with the discomfort of connection. Those are the small ways. Those are the unspoken verses of her love poem. And those who are watching with a shallow eye may miss it. They may say, but they never say how they feel, or they don't act romantic because they are looking for a language that isn't spoken here. But you, with your soul tuned to the quiet, you will see it. You will feel it in the way they always show up when it truly counts. You will hear it in the message they send when you're sick, asking if you've eaten. You will feel it in the way they remember what made you cry last week, even if they didn't know how to comfort you then. The small ways are never small when they come from someone who had to fight their own fear just to reach out. Their love is in the way they ask you to be careful on your drive. It's in the way they remember your allergy, your middle name, the story about your grandfather that you thought no one heard. It's in the way they offer you a bite of their food, not because they want to share, but because they want to connect. It's in the way they sit beside you, just a little closer than usual, as though their body is learning to trust proximity. These are not random gestures. These are acts of bravery. These are quiet revolutions of a soul that has lived in solitude, now choosing, piece by tender piece, to invite someone in. And while others are searching for red roses and love letters, you, blessed with patience and holy observation, will notice how they tilt the umbrella to cover you when it rains. You will know what it means when they sit with you through your silence instead of filling it. You will understand that for the one who once fled from closeness, simply staying, simply remembering, simply choosing to return day after day is the loudest love they've ever spoken. There is a divine turning point in the heart of the avoidant. One so subtle it might slip by the untrained eye, one so sacred it deserves to be honored not with judgment, but with reverence. It is the moment when their treasured distance, the space they once clung to for survival, begins to feel like a threat, not a sanctuary. You see, for so long, distance was their friend. It was their protector, their shelter, their silence when the world got too loud. It was the gap that allowed them to feel safe from expectations, from closeness, from pain. But when the right soul arrives, patient, soft-spoken, but unwavering, something ancient begins to stir in them. They begin to realize that the very distance they relied on is the same distance that could cost them something real, something rare, something that feels dangerously close to love. The avoidant doesn't wake up one day and say, "I love you." No, their awakening begins with the dread that rises in their chest when they think of you walking away. At first, it's a whisper. Maybe you've stopped reaching out as much. Maybe your voice over the phone no longer carries the same warmth. Or maybe you've grown tired of chasing them through mazes they built for their own protection. They notice it not with logic, but with emotion, a subtle ache, an unshakable restlessness, a sudden fear that you might not be there tomorrow. And child, that fear is sacred. That fear is the trembling proof that the wall they built is now cracking under the weight of their care. Imagine a man who has always been the first to pull away. He prides himself on being unbothered, self-sufficient, untouchable. When conflict arises, he shuts down. When emotions get too intense, he vanishes. But then one day, after a simple disagreement, you go silent. You don't plead. You don't chase. You just disappear into your own stillness, and it rattles him. For the first time, he feels it, that gnawing anxiety, that itch under the skin that tells him something important is slipping. He doesn't know how to explain it, but he finds himself checking his phone, pacing the room, playing back your last words. That is not indifference. That is attachment learning how to breathe. That is love whispering through the cracks of a man who once swore he'd never need anyone. And he may not come back with a sonnet or a sorry. No, not yet. He may send you a meme to test the waters. He may casually ask how your day was, pretending everything is normal. But behind that facade is a deep-rooted fear. What if I've lost them? That fear is not manipulation, it's a milestone. It means you become real to him, not just convenient, not just enjoyable, but essential in a way that terrifies him. Because now, to lose you would be to lose a part of his safety, a part of his hope, a part of himself he didn't even know had begun to soften. This transformation is rarely loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or epiphanies. It arrives in the form of late-night thoughts and daydreams of what life would feel like without your laughter, your patience, your touch. It shows up when he sees your name and his chest tightens, not because he's annoyed, but because he cares, and caring feels unfamiliar. You have disrupted the script he's lived by for years, and now distance no longer brings peace. It brings panic. It brings regret. It brings questions he never wanted to ask himself. Why do I care so much? Why does it hurt when they're gone? What am I so afraid of losing? Think of the woman who has always claimed she prefers solitude. She moves through life with grace and control, never asking, never needing, never wavering. But then you begin to pull away, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. And suddenly she starts to overthink. She rereads your messages. She wonders if she said something wrong. She shows up in places she normally wouldn't. She lingers in conversations that she once escaped. She starts giving more, not because she's changed overnight, but because something inside her is waking up. A realization that your absence costs more than her pride is worth. That's the moment when fear becomes the mirror, reflecting the truth she has long denied. I want them. I need them. I don't want to lose them. And there is beauty in that unraveling. There is poetry in the panic of love, because for the avoidant, that fear is not weakness, it is growth. It is the sacred signal that their soul, once so well defended, has begun to open. That love has found its way through the maze. And now they are no longer afraid of closeness. They are afraid of your distance. They are no longer retreating into silence. They are leaning into the risk. They are no longer comforted by escape. They are haunted by the thought of letting you go. It begins not with confession, but with contradiction. The avoidant, that sacred soul who's built their world with stone walls and silent exits, begins to tremble at the edges of their fortress, not because they have planned it and not because they are ready, but because love, real love, has a way of slipping in through the cracks. It does not ask for permission. It does not knock on the door. It leaks in like sunlight through old curtains, like music under a locked door, like a whisper that keeps echoing long after the words have stopped. And before they know it, their armor no longer fits the same. The edges that once kept people out have begun to soften, and the smile they once used to hide behind becomes unsteady, almost tender. This is the sacred leaking of vulnerability, the slow, messy, beautiful unveiling of a heart that never thought it would dare to be seen. You won't see it in a monologue. You won't hear it in, "I love you." No, that's not how they bleed. You'll see it in the hesitation before they say goodbye. You'll see it in the way their hand lingers a moment longer than usual. You'll feel it in their nervous laughter when you say something that stirs emotion they don't yet know how to name. Vulnerability for them is not bold, it's broken. Not loud, it's layered, and that is what makes it holy. A man who once rolled his eyes at emotional conversations now finds himself sitting silently beside you when you cry, unsure of what to say, but knowing that leaving would hurt more than staying. A woman who once brushed off compliments now blushes, looks down, and mutters "thank you" with a softness that almost breaks her. That is not weakness. That is sacred strength. And it's not constant. Oh no, it's not a clean unraveling. It's a stutter. It's a dance forward and back. It's one moment of openness followed by a retreat into silence. You'll catch a glimpse of their rawness in the way they talk about their childhood, just for a moment, a flicker in the eye, a crack in the voice, and then they'll quickly change the subject. You'll notice it when they tell you something small but sacred, like the way they used to feel invisible at the dinner table, or how they were once left waiting in the rain by someone who promised to show up and never did. They may laugh as they say it, masking it as a joke, but pay attention, child, that's no joke. That's their truth dressed in armor. That's a wound peeking out from the sleeve of pride. Imagine someone who's always been put together, controlled, poised in every setting. They speak like they're reading a script. They love like they're writing a contract, always safe, always structured. But one evening, you're sitting together and they fumble. They forget the script. Their voice trembles. Maybe they tell you they missed you. Maybe they admit they were afraid you'd stop calling. They say it quickly, quietly, almost like it wasn't meant to be heard. And then they move on, pretend it never happened. But it did. And in that moment, you saw the truth. You saw the soul behind the structure. That is how vulnerability leaks. Not through declarations, but through slips. Not through certainty, but through stumbles. And there is something profoundly human about those leaks, something eternal. Because in those unguarded moments, they are not their defense mechanisms. They are not their avoidant tendencies. They are not their fear. They are just people, wounded, waiting, hoping, afraid. And that is where love begins to breathe. That is where connection finds its grip. It doesn't take much. A tear they quickly wipe away, a deep sigh before they open up, a story they tell you that they've never shared, not even with themselves. That is how the truth emerges, like spring from frozen ground, like a song hummed in the dark. And yes, they may try to patch the leak. They may apologize for opening up, may act like it meant nothing. They may say, "Forget I said that," or "I don't know why I told you that," but you must know better. You must know what you witnessed was sacred. You saw their softness slip through the cracks. You saw the tender ache behind the eyes, and they may try to seal it again, but the leak is already there. And the more they love you, the harder it is to hold it back. Their fear and their affection, their silence and their honesty begin to dance with one another in that holy, messy place we call vulnerability. And the most broken parts of them, the parts they tried so hard to hide, become the very places where the light gets in. There comes a moment, quiet and often cloaked in ordinary light, when the one who once stood like stone begins to open a door that no one else even knew was there. It does not swing wide. It does not creak and declare itself. It simply cracks, a sliver of light where there was once nothing but shadow. For the avoidant, letting someone in is not just difficult, it is sacred. It is the shedding of years. It is the breaking of vows made in solitude. You see, they promised themselves long ago they would never be that exposed again. They built houses with no windows. They learned to survive on silence. But love, true, disarming, steady love, arrives not with a battering ram, but with presence. And slowly, the walls grow tired of holding. You'll notice it when they take you places they've never taken anyone before. Not restaurants or cities, no, but places inside themselves. Places they've locked even from their own reflection. They begin to speak of their father not as a hero or a villain, but as a man they're still trying to understand. They tell you of the time they lost a friend and how they pretended not to grieve, how the pain showed up in dreams and distant glances. They tell you about the version of themselves they used to be and how that person still visits sometimes, especially when they're scared. These are not just stories, these are keys. Each memory shared is a threshold you are being invited across, quietly, respectfully, without celebration, but with gravity. There's a man who for years has kept his heart under lock and code. When women asked how he felt, he'd change the subject. When love asked him to be vulnerable, he'd armor up and disappear. But with her, this one who didn't try to fix him, who didn't chase him down but stood in her own light, he begins to let her into rooms no one else has seen. One night, as they sit in the stillness after laughter, he tells her about the guilt he carries, about how he was there when his little brother needed him and chose to walk away. His voice cracks. He doesn't cry, but his hands tremble. And then he says, "I've never told anyone that." That is the letting in. That is not just a confession, it is communion. Or picture a woman who has always been the strong one, the one who held everyone else, the one whose silence was mistaken for strength. Her world is curated, managed, exact. No one has ever seen her fall apart. But one night, as you hold her in quiet intimacy, She whispers a fear so raw it doesn't even sound like her voice. She tells you that sometimes when she wakes up alone, she wonders if she will always be that way. She tells you that being loved feels unfamiliar, like shoes that don't quite fit but are too beautiful to take off. She lets you touch the part of her that is not polished, and in that moment, you are not just a lover, you are a witness to her becoming. Letting you in for them isn't about access to facts or favorite movies. It is access to their humanity. It is you noticing when they go quiet, not because they're angry, but because they're overwhelmed. It is them allowing you to see their routines, their coping mechanisms, their little rituals that they've never shared before. It's the way they leave a toothbrush at your house but pretend it was an accident. It's the way they start using we instead of I, catching themselves laughing nervously but not correcting it. They start telling you about things before they happen instead of after, about the meeting they're nervous about the trip that's stressing them out. You're no longer a guest in their life. You've moved into the space between their thoughts.